Is the criticism around Shedeur Sanders really about performance, or is something else driving the narrative? When respected voices around the Cleveland Browns drew a hard line early, it didn't just raise eyebrows, it sparked a debate that refuses to fade. The moment the early verdict dropped, it didn't just sound like analysis, it sounded final. And that's what stunned fans of the Cleveland Browns. Before the season had fully breathed, before meaningful development could even unfold, the conclusion was already stamped. Shedeur Sanders wasn't the answer. That kind of statement carries weight in the NFL. Saying a quarterback needs time is normal. Saying he has flaws is expected. But declaring he's not the guy, that's different. That's organizational. That's franchise-altering. And for a team that has spent years cycling through quarterbacks, Browns fans know exactly how dangerous early labels can become. Context matters here. Cleveland hasn't exactly had long-term stability under center. Since moving on from previous starters, the franchise has lived in a constant search for consistency. Draft picks, trades, veteran experiments, each one introduced with hope, each one dissected under a microscope. So when another young quarterback enters the conversation, emotions are already high, patience is thin, expectations are complicated. What made the early criticism hit harder wasn't just the words, it was the timing. Sanders was still adjusting to NFL speed, processing pro-level defenses, and adapting to playbook complexity. Rookie quarterbacks rarely look polished out of the gate. Even some of today's elite names had rocky stretches in their first season. Development is rarely linear. It's uneven. It's uncomfortable. Yet the tone of the verdict suggested something more permanent. Not he's growing, not he needs refinement, but something closer to dismissal, and fans picked up on that difference immediately. Social media lit up with debates. Some agreed, pointing to missed reads and mechanical inconsistencies. Others pushed back, arguing that writing off a young quarterback that quickly felt premature. There's also the psychology of expectations. Sanders arrived with attention, pedigree, and hype. That spotlight cuts both ways. When a player is hyped, critics often sharpen their knives faster. Fair or not, higher expectations create lower tolerance for early mistakes. That dynamic doesn't just exist in Cleveland, it's league-wide. But in a city starved for quarterback certainty, the reaction feels amplified. And here's the deeper layer. When a respected voice delivers a firm judgment early, it shapes the narrative going forward. Every incomplete pass becomes confirmation. Every mistake reinforces the storyline. That's how media framing works. It doesn't need to be intentional to be powerful. Once the narrative forms, it's hard to shake. The question Browns fans began asking wasn't whether Sanders had flaws. Of course he did. The real question was whether he had truly been evaluated or simply categorized. Because in the NFL, the difference between unfinished and not the answer can determine an entire career arc. And that's where this debate really began. Everything seemed manageable until that one midseason game. Up to that point, the debate around Shedeur Sanders had been simmering. Some flashes, some mistakes, the usual rookie roller coaster. But then came the performance that critics had been waiting for, the kind of game that doesn't just raise concerns, it amplifies them. It wasn't just the stat line, it was the timing of the errors. A stalled red zone drive, a late throw that defenders read too easily, a hesitation on a third down read that killed momentum. In the NFL, small mistakes feel massive when they happen in critical moments, and this one had plenty of them. Immediately after, the narrative hardened. Certain analysts pointed to that matchup as proof, not evidence of growing pains, proof. The argument shifted from "he needs development" to "this confirms what we already suspected." That's when the conversation around the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation intensified. But context matters. Midseason is often where rookie quarterbacks hit a wall. Defensive coordinators have enough film to identify tendencies. Coverage disguises get more complex. Blitz packages become more creative. The league adjusts fast. For young quarterbacks, that stretch can be brutal. Some survive it, some spiral, some learn from it quietly. What made this game controversial wasn't that Sanders struggled. It was how quickly the performance became symbolic. Instead of being treated as one data point in a larger development curve, it became the defining snapshot. Confirmation bias crept into the discussion. Every missed throw reinforced earlier skepticism. Every incomplete pass was replayed with added weight. Fans noticed the tone shift. Social media reactions were split. Some argued the criticism was justified, NFL is results-driven and the margin for error is thin. Others pushed back, saying the reaction felt disproportionate. One game shouldn't outweigh weeks of gradual improvement. There's also the pressure factor. Cleveland's quarterback history looms over every snap. The organization doesn't just want competence, it wants certainty. So when a young quarterback falters, anxiety spikes faster than in more stable franchises. That urgency bleeds into coverage. Still, it's important to separate frustration from final judgment. Mid-season struggles have defined plenty of careers, both positively and negatively. What matters isn't the dip. It's the response afterward. Does the quarterback adjust? Does the coaching staff simplify? Does confidence erode or sharpen? At that moment, though, the discourse didn't wait for answers. The midseason game became a turning point in public perception. It fueled headlines, it intensified debate, it solidified critics. But here's the part that made everything more interesting. It wasn't the last chapter of the story. Just when the narrative felt settled, everything shifted. After the midseason stumble that fueled critics, Shedeur Sanders walked into the next matchup carrying more than just a playbook. He carried doubt, he carried headlines, he carried a growing belief in some corners that the verdict was already written, and that's exactly why what happened next mattered. From the opening drive, the tone felt different. The footwork looked cleaner, the ball came out quicker. Instead of hesitating against disguised coverages, he trusted his reads. A tight window throw on 3rd and long silenced an early pass rush. A perfectly layered sideline completion showed touch critics claimed he lacked. It wasn't flawless, no young quarterback is, but it was composed. More importantly, it was controlled. You could see the adjustment: shorter drops, quicker decisions, fewer hero ball attempts. The coaching staff appeared to simplify certain progressions, giving him rhythm early. That rhythm turned into confidence, and confidence changes everything for a quarterback. By halftime, the energy around the Cleveland Browns felt noticeably different. Teammates rallied, body language improved, the offense looked organized instead of tense. Even the broadcast tone subtly softened. When momentum swings in the NFL, it swings fast. Statistically, the performance didn't shatter records, that wasn't the point. The significance was in command. He navigated pressure, he adjusted protections, he extended plays without forcing reckless throws. That's growth, that's processing speed improving in real time. And fans noticed. Social media, which had been flooded with criticism days earlier, became divided again, but in a new way. Some analysts acknowledged the progress, pointing out mechanical tweaks and better timing routes. Others argued it was just one good outing. The debate didn't disappear, it evolved. That's when the conversation quietly shifted. Instead of focusing solely on whether he could survive in the league, the dialogue moved toward ceiling. Could he build on this? Was this a turning point or just a temporary spike? Those questions carry more hope than doubt. And in Cleveland, hope always travels fast. There was also a psychological component. Bounce-back performances don't just repair stat sheets, they test resilience. Quarterbacks are judged as much on response as results. How you handle criticism, how you process failure, how you respond under pressure, that defines longevity. Some fans believe that game proved he wasn't rattled. Others suggest the defense he faced wasn't elite, so the performance should be tempered. Both perspectives exist. That's the nature of NFL discourse. But one thing became clear: the early final verdict no longer felt as secure. Because once a quarterback shows visible adjustment, the conversation can't stay static. And that's when things started getting even more complicated. The conversation didn't cool off after the bounce-back performance, it mutated. When Shedeur Sanders started stacking more composed drives and cutting down the obvious mistakes, the criticism didn't disappear, it just shifted lanes. Suddenly, the focus wasn't about results anymore, it was about mechanics. Foot placement, release angle, lower body alignment, arm slot consistency. Those details matter. In the NFL, they always matter. Quarterback mechanics are the foundation of accuracy and durability. But what raised eyebrows wasn't that analysts brought them up, it was when they brought them up. Earlier in the season, the concern was production. Could he move the offense? Could he limit turnovers? Could he handle pressure? When those areas began showing improvement, the microscope zoomed in tighter. The debate moved from outcomes to form. That's when some fans started asking a different question: are the goalposts moving? To be fair, mechanical critiques are legitimate. Scouts dissect them during the draft process for a reason. A slightly open front shoulder can cause balls to sail. An inconsistent base can affect velocity. If you want to project long-term success, you analyze those habits early. That's standard football evaluation. But timing changes perception. When mechanics become the dominant critique after statistical growth, it can feel like the standard keeps shifting. Instead of asking, is he improving? The conversation becomes, is his ceiling limited? That's a deeper, more speculative debate. Some observers believe this reflects natural evaluation. Once surface-level flaws improve, analysts move to the next layer. Others suggest it shows hesitation to fully embrace the turnaround. That perspective remains speculation, but it's a sentiment circulating among segments of the fan base. The tone also evolved. Instead of outright dismissal, the framing became cautious skepticism. Phrases like "still not convinced" and "long-term concerns remain" started replacing definitive statements. That's not condemnation, but it's not endorsement either. And in a city like Cleveland, nuance often gets drowned out. The Cleveland Browns are operating under constant urgency. They don't just want improvement, they want certainty. So when mechanics enter the spotlight, it feeds a bigger fear. Is this a temporary hot streak, or are there foundational limitations? What complicates things further is that mechanical adjustments take time. They're not flipped overnight. Coaches tweak them gradually to avoid disrupting confidence. So even if there are imperfections, progress can still coexist with refinement. That's the tension. Can a quarterback develop while being scrutinized in real time? Can growth be acknowledged without immediately searching for the next flaw? Those questions don't have simple answers. What's undeniable is this: once the mechanics debate began, the conversation became less about week-to-week performance and more about projection. And projection is where opinions split the hardest. Because evaluating what a quarterback is today is one thing. Deciding what he'll become, that's where the real divide begins. The debate didn't truly explode until the media voices started turning on each other. Up to that point, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders had mostly been about performance, mechanics, and projection. But when G. Bush publicly challenged the tone of the criticism, and Ken Carman weighed in with his own perspective, the focus shifted from the quarterback to the coverage itself. And that's when things got personal. G. Bush didn't just disagree with the evaluation, he questioned the consistency behind it. His argument wasn't that Sanders was flawless. It was that the analysis felt predetermined, that certain voices had made up their minds early and every new development was being filtered through that original stance. That accusation hit hard. Because in sports media, credibility is currency. Suggesting someone is locked into a narrative isn't a light critique. It implies bias, it implies ego, it implies that being right matters more than being fair. Ken Carman added fuel to the situation by suggesting the tone of the coverage felt unusually sharp. Not analytical, sharp. His comments hinted that the criticism didn't always feel proportional to the situation. And while he stopped short of making direct accusations, the implication was clear enough to stir reaction. That's when the audience split in a new way. Some fans applauded the pushback. They felt it was overdue. They believed the negativity surrounding the Cleveland Browns quarterback room had crossed from scrutiny into something more rigid. To them, Bush and Carman were simply calling out what many listeners had already sensed. Others pushed back just as forcefully. They argued that strong criticism is part of the job. That quarterbacks, especially ones carrying hype, don't deserve protection from hard evaluation. In their view, calling out mistakes isn't bias, it's accountability. But beneath the surface, another dynamic was at play. Sports radio thrives on strong takes. Bold opinions drive engagement. Engagement drives conversation. Conversation drives ratings. When a topic sparks emotion, especially around a quarterback, it becomes oxygen for the media ecosystem. Some observers believe this dynamic naturally escalates debates, even when the original disagreement was minor. That theory remains speculative, but it explains why the Sanders discussion didn't just simmer, it intensified. Instead of asking whether he could develop, the question became whether the coverage itself was fair. That's a different conversation entirely. It's no longer about footwork or reads, it's about narrative control. And here where it gets complicated. If Sanders succeeds long-term, early critics will face receipts. If he struggles, defenders will be forced to reconsider their optimism. That looming accountability raises the stakes for everyone involved, players and analysts alike. What started as football analysis evolved into a credibility battle. And once that line is crossed, it's rarely simple to walk it back. Because now, it's not just about whether Shedeur Sanders can prove people wrong. It's about who's willing to adjust when the evidence changes. The conversation took another turn when whispers about the locker room started creeping in. Not official reports, not verified conflicts, just subtle questions layered into the broader debate around Shedeur Sanders. And in the NFL, once locker room chemistry enters the discussion, everything changes. Because performance issues can be fixed, scheme can be adjusted, mechanics can be refined. But if a quarterback loses the locker room, that's different, that's often irreversible. To be clear, there have been no confirmed reports of fractures inside the Cleveland Browns locker room tied to Sanders. No verified stories of teammates tuning him out. No public disputes. That distinction matters. Still, the mere suggestion started circulating in certain conversations. Some fans began asking whether veteran players fully believed in him. Others wondered if the early criticism from media voices might subtly influence perception inside the building. That idea remains speculative, there's no concrete evidence supporting it, but in today's NFL ecosystem, narratives travel fast. Quarterbacks carry a unique burden. They aren't just play callers, they are tone setters, body language after a turnover, leadership in the huddle, accountability at the podium. Teammates read those signals constantly, and outside observers try to interpret them from afar. That's where things get tricky. On-field frustration can look like tension. Silence in a press conference can look like division. A missed handshake can spark theories online. Social media slows down every frame and fills in gaps with assumptions. But inside NFL buildings, leadership often looks different than fans imagine. Veterans don't expect perfection from young quarterbacks. They expect growth, preparation, ownership. If a rookie makes mistakes but studies film relentlessly and takes responsibility, that earns respect. Reports from team insiders have not indicated any internal rift related to Sanders. In fact, some post-game reactions have suggested teammates appreciate his composure under pressure. That doesn't mean every player is automatically sold. NFL locker rooms are layered with personalities. Trust builds over time, but there's a difference between normal developmental tension and genuine fracture. And so far, there's no verified evidence of the latter. Still, the speculation highlights something deeper. When criticism shifts from mechanics to mentality, the stakes escalate. It implies character evaluation, and that's where debates can become unfair quickly. Some observers believe that when performance arguments lose steam, personality narratives sometimes emerge to fill the void. That's not a confirmed pattern in this situation, but it's a dynamic seen across the league before. For the Browns, stability matters more than ever. The franchise has cycled through quarterbacks for years, and the locker room understands how disruptive constant turnover can be. If there were serious internal concerns, credible reporters would likely surface them. Silence, in this case, may be telling. At the end of the day, locker room trust isn't built through headlines. It's built through third-down conversions, through film sessions, through owning mistakes publicly and fixing them privately. And as of now, the real story isn't division. It's uncertainty. Because until either undeniable success or undeniable failure arrives, the questions will keep hovering. But hovering questions aren't the same as confirmed problems. And that distinction could determine how this entire narrative unfolds moving forward. The bigger issue hovering over this entire debate isn't mechanics. It isn't one midseason game. It isn't even media tension. It's time. The Cleveland Browns are not operating in a patient rebuild. They're operating under pressure, real pressure. The kind that comes from years of quarterback instability, roster investment, and fan fatigue. And that context changes how a player like Shedeur Sanders is evaluated. This franchise has cycled through starter after starter over the past 2 decades. Draft picks, Veterans, bridge quarterbacks, splashy trades, short-term solutions, long-term experiments, very few of them stuck. That history doesn't just sit in the background, it shapes every decision the front office makes. When a team has been searching for the guy for that long, patience becomes expensive. There's also the roster timeline to consider. Cleveland has invested heavily in key positions across the field. Defensive stars are in their prime. Offensive playmakers are under contract. The window to compete doesn't stay open forever. In the NFL, prime years disappear quickly. That's where the tension begins. Developing a young quarterback properly can take 2 to 3 seasons, sometimes longer. Processing speed improves gradually. Defensive recognition sharpens with experience. Command of the huddle grows over time, but what if the organization doesn't feel like it has 3 years to wait? Some insiders around the league have suggested that teams with playoff-ready rosters often struggle to commit fully to long development arcs. That doesn't mean the Browns are abandoning patience, but it does mean the timeline is tighter than it would be for a rebuilding franchise. That perspective has been floated in NFL circles, though it remains interpretive rather than confirmed internal strategy. Then there's draft capital. Quarterback decisions ripple forward if Sanders develops into a reliable starter. Future draft resources can be allocated elsewhere: offensive line depth, secondary reinforcement, rotational pass rushers. But if doubt lingers, front offices start planning contingencies. Scouting departments begin monitoring upcoming quarterback classes. Trade scenarios quietly enter discussions. That doesn't mean a move is imminent, it means optionality matters. And optionality creates subtle pressure. Financial structure adds another layer. Rookie contracts are valuable because they create cap flexibility. A productive quarterback on a manageable deal allows teams to stack talent around him. But that advantage only holds if the quarterback proves worthy of long-term investment. Extension conversations, fifth-year options, franchise tags, those decisions arrive faster than fans realize. Every snap becomes data. Every start becomes part of a long-term calculation. Some fans believe the Browns should commit fully and live with the growing pains. Others argue that with a competitive defense and strong supporting cast, the margin for experimentation is thin. Both viewpoints have logic behind them. But here's the reality: front offices rarely think emotionally. They think in windows, they think in timelines, they think in asset management. If Sanders continues trending upward, the conversation stabilizes. If inconsistency returns, speculation intensifies, and speculation around quarterbacks never stays quiet in Cleveland. There's also the psychological layer. When a franchise has experienced repeated quarterback resets, decision-makers may become either overly cautious or overly aggressive. History influences risk tolerance. That's human nature. It's not confirmed policy, but it's a dynamic scene across professional sports. So while media debates grab headlines, the real stakes sit inside the building. It's about alignment between coaching staff, front office, and ownership. It's about whether development and urgency can coexist. It's about whether the Browns believe their competitive window can survive short-term growing pains. Because this isn't just a conversation about one season. It's about trajectory. And in Cleveland, trajectory matters more than promises. The question isn't whether Shedeur Sanders can flash potential. It's whether the organization believes that potential fits its timeline. And that's where this entire story quietly becomes bigger than one quarterback. As the new season approaches, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders isn't just about highlight throws, social media buzz, or off-season headlines. It's about alignment. It's about direction. And most importantly, it's about whether the Cleveland Browns are finally ready to commit to a long-term vision at quarterback, or if they're still bracing for another pivot. For Cleveland, this season doesn't begin in week 1. It begins with expectation. The roster is competitive. The defense has proven it can keep games tight. Playmakers on offense are capable of flipping momentum in a single drive. This isn't a team entering a slow rebuild. It's a team that believes it should be in the playoff conversation right now. That reality changes everything. Quarterback development is rarely linear. There are games where the field looks small and manageable, where anticipation and timing create rhythm. And then there are games where disguised coverages, pressure packages, and late rotations force hesitation. The true test for Sanders this season won't be whether he can produce explosive moments. He's already shown flashes. It will be whether he can string together consistent decision-making under pressure. Because consistency earns trust, and trust determines timelines. Internally, the stakes are layered. Coaching staffs want progress they can measure. Improved pre-snap reads, quicker release under blitz, command in 2-minute drills, protection adjustments at the line. Front offices want trajectory. Is the arrow pointing clearly upward? Are the mistakes decreasing? Is leadership resonating in the locker room? Ownership wants clarity. The Browns cannot afford another ambiguous year at quarterback, not because of panic, but because ambiguity forces contingency planning. When a franchise isn't certain, it starts preparing options. Scouting departments quietly evaluate upcoming draft classes. Cap strategists map out alternative structures. Veteran trade markets are monitored, not as a signal of failure, but as insurance. And insurance creates subtle pressure. There's also the contract window factor. A productive quarterback on a rookie-scale contract provides enormous roster flexibility. It allows a team to fortify depth, retain defensive anchors, and add veteran reinforcements without crippling the salary cap. But that advantage only becomes meaningful if the quarterback solidifies himself as the long-term solution before extension talks begin. Every snap this season is part of that evaluation. It's not just about wins and losses, it's about how those wins happen. Does Sanders elevate the offense late in games? Does he protect the football in tight divisional matchups? Can he adapt when defenses adjust mid-game? The AFC landscape isn't forgiving. Quarterback play in the conference is elite. To contend seriously, Cleveland doesn't just need competence, it needs stability and growth. And then there's the locker room dynamic. Players respond to belief. When teammates feel that a quarterback owns the huddle, accountability strengthens. Offensive linemen block harder for a leader they trust. Receivers commit to routes knowing the ball will arrive on time. Defensive players feed off complementary football. Momentum becomes sustainable rather than sporadic. If Sanders commands that environment, the narrative shifts organically. Media debates quiet down when performance answers questions. But if inconsistency lingers, the conversation won't stay internal. Cleveland's fan base has lived through decades of quarterback turnover. That history amplifies scrutiny. Every interception triggers flashbacks. Every stalled drive revives old doubts. The emotional weight of past instability makes patience thinner, not necessarily inside the building, but externally. That external pressure seeps inward. The coaching staff must balance development with urgency. Do they open up the playbook fully? Do they protect the quarterback with simplified reads early? Do they lean heavily on the run game while Sanders settles in? Strategic decisions early in the season will reveal how confident they are in his readiness. This season is about proof of concept. Not perfection, but proof. Proof that growth is tangible. Proof that leadership is organic. Proof that the trajectory aligns with the roster's competitive window. If that proof materializes, Cleveland can move forward with conviction. Draft strategy simplifies. Cap planning stabilizes. Offensive identity becomes clearer. If it doesn't, the offseason becomes complicated. That's the real stake heading into the new season. It's not about viral moments or offseason speculation. It's about whether the Browns can finally step off the quarterback carousel and plant a flag in stability. For Shedeur Sanders, this is an opportunity few quarterbacks receive, the chance to define an organization's direction. For Cleveland, it's a crossroads season, one that could either cement belief or reopen uncertainty. And in the NFL, certainty at quarterback isn't a luxury. It's everything.